All right, let's jump right into this explainer for topic 1.2, types of business entities. We're going to demystify the legal structures behind the brands, companies, and organizations we interact with every single day. Because, whether you realize it or not, the business world is highly, highly structured. And getting a grip on these structures, that's the absolute key to understanding how our global economy actually functions. I mean, really think about it for a second. Every time you grab a coffee from that local cafe, or order a package online from some massive conglomerate, or even visit a hospital, you are engaging with a specific legal entity. These aren't just random groups of people hanging out. They're meticulously designed structures with very distinct purposes, rules, and objectives. And once you understand who owns them and why they're set up the way they are, it will completely change how you view the marketplace. So, here's our roadmap for today. We'll be looking at 1. Public versus private sectors, 2. Sole traders and partnerships, 3. Limited companies and corporations, 4. For-profit social enterprises, and finally 5. Nonprofit organizations. All right, kicking things off with Section 1, Public versus Private Sectors. This is the biggest macro-level division in our whole economy, and it brilliantly illustrates the sharp contrast right at the foundation of the market. So on one side, we've got the public sector. This is all about public welfare. Think police forces, public schools, national infrastructure. These are owned and controlled by the government. Then, on the flip side, is the private sector. This is made up of households, businesses, and organizations that are driven largely by a commercial, profit-making incentive. Take this public hospital in New Delhi, for example. Because it operates in the public sector, its main goal isn't squeezing out maximum profit for shareholders. No, its primary objective is making sure healthcare is supplied to the general population. It's an essential service. Now, we do often see governments partner up with the private sector to get these things done, like how the Indian government recently teamed up with private clinics to establish standard treatments for tuberculosis. But at the end of the day, the public sector's true mandate is serving the public. Moving on to Section 2, sole traders and partnerships. Now, let's zoom in on the private sector. Commercial ventures usually start their evolutionary journey as tiny individual operations. A sole trader, or sole proprietorship, is exactly what it sounds like. It's a business owned by one single person. Think of your local plumber, or maybe a freelance graphic designer. They call all the shots, they don't have to answer to some board of directors, and the best part, they keep all the profits. But man, running a business entirely by yourself is tough. Actually, a Sydney Morning Herald survey found that sole proprietors often feel terribly overburdened by administration, literally spending millions of combined hours a week just dealing with paperwork. And beyond the grind, they face one massive structural risk. And that crucial point is unlimited liability. In the eyes of the law, there is absolutely zero distinction between the individual owner and the business itself. They are one and the same. So, if the business takes on debt it can't pay, or worse, gets sued, the owner is personally on the hook. If the business goes bankrupt, the owner could literally lose their own house, their car, or their life savings to cover the costs. It is a huge risk. So naturally, if a sole trader decides they need some help, they might bring on a friend or colleague to share the workload and maybe inject some fresh cash into the business. When they do this, they form a partnership. They draw up a legal agreement, figure out their profit-sharing percentages, map out their mutual goals. It's great for raising funds and brainstorming, but there's a major catch here. Both partners still carry that heavy burden of unlimited liability. If one partner makes a catastrophic mistake, well, both partners' personal assets are right there on the chopping block. Let's look at how to fix that in Section 3, Limited Companies and Corporations. So to solve those terrifying real-world problems of unlimited liability and honestly the inability to raise big chunks of capital, a business can evolve. They do this by going through a process called incorporation. And this is a real game changer because it creates a legal firewall. Through incorporation, the business literally becomes its own separate legal entity. It can own property, it can sign contracts on its own. And because of this separation, the owners, who are now called shareholders, are granted limited liability. This means shareholders can only lose the money they initially invested in the company. Their personal assets, like their homes, completely protected if the company goes under. Building on this idea of incorporation, you basically have two paths you can take. First, a privately held company. This protects its owners with that limited liability we just talked about, but it keeps tight control. Shares are sold privately and usually only if the other shareholders agree to it. On the flip side, you have the publicly held company, which sells its shares out on the open stock exchange. Doing this lets them raise massive amounts of capital from the general public, perfect for global expansion.
But of course, that cash comes at a cost. You're looking at intense regulatory scrutiny, diluted control, and the ever-present risk of a hostile takeover by outside investors. All right, shifting gears a bit to Section 4, for-profit social enterprises.
So, what if a business wants to make a healthy profit, but simultaneously fulfill a greater purpose? Well, this brings us to a really fascinating hybrid model. These unique entities use standard, competitive, cutthroat business principles to survive in the market, but they do it to achieve specific social or ethical goals, rather than just maximizing dividends for their shareholders. They're basically fighting to make the world a better place, and they're using capitalism as the engine to actually pull it off. They typically balance three main objectives. First up is the economic objective. They absolutely must earn a profit because, hey, without revenue, they go bust. Second is the social objective. They might focus heavily on providing jobs to disadvantaged groups or directly supporting their local community. And third, the environmental objective, making sure their operations are sustainable and actually protect the planet. The beauty here is that their financial success directly fuels these positive outcomes. A prime example of this kind of enterprise is the cooperative. A cooperative is democratically controlled by its members. That means each member typically gets exactly one vote regardless of how much money they've actually invested. We see this play out with producer cooperatives, where farmers might pool their resources so they can afford expensive harvesting equipment, or consumer cooperatives, where people group together to buy goods in bulk to slash prices, and even worker cooperatives, where the employees themselves own and manage the entire business.
And finally, Section 5, nonprofit organizations, or NGOs.
We've reached the end of our taxonomy arc, looking at entities that completely strip away the profit motive to focus purely on a mission. Non-governmental organizations, or NGOs, operate independently from governments. Think of huge groups like the Red Cross. Now, while they might receive some government grants here and there, they are fundamentally separate entities. Any surplus revenue they happen to generate, it's not paid out as profit to owners, absolutely not. It gets reinvested directly back into their core humanitarian or social cause. They're also incredibly active in lobbying governments to promote causes like environmental protection or human rights. They're also incredibly active in lobbying governments to promote causes like environmental protection or human rights. So what does this all mean? Ultimately, the legal form a business takes isn't just some boring administrative technicality. It is fundamentally dictated by its mission, its scale, and its appetite for risk. So I want to leave you with this provocative thought. If you were to launch your own enterprise tomorrow, what exactly is your vision? And which of these structures would you choose to bring that vision to life? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and hey, keep looking closely at the businesses around you.